And the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
My name is Dan Ayat, and I'm the president of the Timmins Chamber of Commerce. We're ready to roll, Carmen? Everybody's in?
Everyone's in. Show is yours.
Perfect. Sorry about that, everyone. I didn't see everybody log in. Again, my name is Dan Ayat. I am the president of the Chamber of Commerce. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we find ourselves on the traditional lands of the Matagami and Matachewan First Nation in the Treaty 9 territory. Please take a moment to recognize the importance of the lands we all call home. As an organization, we are to improve relationships between the nations and improve our own understanding of local Indigenous people and their cultures. June is National Indigenous History Month in Canada, a time to recognize the rich history, heritage, resilience, and diversity of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. Today, Ontario Power Generation joins us to discuss investing in a clean future. We will hear from Ahmad Al-Ali, Director of Hydro Business Development at OPG. Ahmad has firsthand knowledge of the hydroelectric and the broader utility industry, and will discuss the remarkable potential that Northern Ontario holds in shaping the energy future for our province. Thank you all for joining us, and I'll pass it over to the Ontario Power Generation team.
Hi, good morning, everyone. So my name is Kate Canton. I am a senior communications advisor with OPG in Timmins, and I'll pass it over to Ahmad to introduce himself in just a couple minutes. But before we get started on today's presentation, I just wanted to acknowledge on behalf of OPG that all of OPG's facilities across Ontario are located on treaty and traditional territories of Indigenous people. It's really important to OPG that we take time to acknowledge the treaties and territories. It's a reminder of the privileges and benefits that we enjoy as citizens of Ontario. And it's a reminder that those benefits are rooted in the longstanding treaties and historical relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. As I mentioned, I'm Kate Canton. I may know some of you from previous dealings with OPG. I cover stakeholder relations for the Northeast region, which goes all the way from Kapuskasing and Smooth Rock Falls to south to the South River Powassan area. So just a little bit of actually, let me just share my screen first, and then we'll just give a little bit of a background on why we requested to present today. So can everybody see the full screen sort of presentation?
Yes, Kate.
Yes.
All right. Back in February, OPG released, or the Ministry of Energy released a report that was written by OPG and called the Northern Ontario Hydro Opportunities Report. And from that report, we started getting some requests from different chambers in different areas to do a little bit of a presentation or a breakdown of the report and what it means for folks in Northern Ontario. So instead of doing many different presentations to different chambers, we had asked the Timmins Chamber to help us to speak to all of the chambers in Northern Ontario at one time. So that's sort of how this presentation came about. And from there, I'm going to pass it over to Ahmad to speak a little bit more to what we're speaking about today.
Okay, thanks, Kate, and good morning, everyone. As Dan, did an introduction earlier. Ahmad Al-Ali, I'm the Director of Hydro Business Development, and my role in OPG is really to lead many of our hydro development opportunities in Ontario, with focus on the Northeast and the Southeast regions. So what we wanted to do today is just do a quick overview of some of the findings from and talk about some of the opportunities that we have in Ontario for additional hydro supply, and also talk about a few of the sort of the benefits that comes with hydro. I think a lot of you have heard about Ontario Power Generation in one shape or form. Our company is continuing to evolve and grow, and where we stand today is that we have, our operations are span across Ontario. We have 2 large nuclear stations. We also have 2 leased nuclear sites in Bruce Power. We also have a couple of thermal stations, 1 solar, and 66 hydroelectric stations across Ontario. In the last few years, we've also acquired operations in the US with 87 hydro stations, as well as 4 gas power stations in Ontario under Atura Power. And operations in the US are under Eagle Creek. So we'll talk a little bit about some of the untapped hydro opportunities. Kate touched on the Northern Ontario Hydro Opportunity Report that we were requested to provide. The ministry gave us the request back in January 2022 to explore opportunities in the north, and we worked on putting that together with input from many stakeholders and Indigenous communities, as well as industry partners. And we issued that report back to we gave that report back to the province. They issued it on our behalf in February of this year. In general, the report highlights few of the benefits. I think we've heard, we probably know most of them, but I think it's important to highlight, reinforce these benefits, and how they tap into a made in Ontario solution. So we have, hydro in general, it's considered a clean, renewable source of energy. It's a mechanism that drives economic growth in the north. So we see it as one of the ways we can advance Northern Ontario development, as well as advance reconciliation. It really one of the mechanisms we can use to actually build more partnerships with our Indigenous communities, and it provides for our understanding based on experience over the last few decades, is that hydro is a made in Ontario solution. 75% of the spend on these multi-million-dollar projects and sometimes multi-billion-dollar projects, 75% of that spend happens in Ontario. And after these assets are put in service, throughout the life of these assets, and these are perpetual assets, they run forever if you maintain them properly. 90% of the spend is also in Ontario. So in terms of sort of the burning platform here, and why are we looking at more generation? Based on the outlook modeling that's been done by the Independent Electricity System Operator, the ISO, our province is going to see continuing growth in demand. That demand is really being triggered by a few factors. With decarbonization of our province and our country, we're going to see a big shift to electrification. A lot of probably the primary sector that's transitioning into electrification is the transit sector, where buses and small medium-sized delivery vehicles, as well as our private vehicles, right? We see that transition to be the main driver for an increase in demand. We're also seeing an increase in demand based on how the growth in economy in general. More industries are coming to Ontario, and more population. We're continuing to grow as a population, and that's going to drive more demand. As we start transitioning away from fossil fuels, we're going to see more industries going into electrification as well, and that's going to drive even further demand. So you can see that, based on this graph, that we do see a gap that or a shortfall that could develop as early as 2029, and that will continue. With the graphs that you see in front of me, these are the energy sources that we know about today. So if we're not actually building any new supply of hydro or nuclear or any other options, you're going to see the trend that's in front of you. And by 2050, when we want to decarbonize our economy in full, we can see our gap as big as 70 terawatt hour. So what does that really mean to us? Basically, what we're saying is that we need to double the supply that we have today. That took us, almost a decade to build. We need to double that supply. Sorry, not a decade, but almost a century to build. We need to double that supply in the next 25 years or so. So it's a big undertaking that we're all going to have to be part of. So what are the, the big benefits about hydro? There's a lot of, there are a few options out there on how you can get your electricity, but what's special about hydro? Hydro really OPG has a lot of history with hydro. It's something we know how to build and operate very safely. We have a strong track record in safe operation of our plants. We operate in a lot of communities across Ontario. We have large generating stations as well as small hydro stations all across the province. Hydro is, as you probably know, it is a clean source of energy. It is probably one of the lowest emissions that you can find out there of any energy source. It's reliable, durable. It can really operate in the harsh winter and summer conditions that we experience in the province, but it's also enduring. It's a multi-generational investment that really benefits many generations. And as long as we have hydro sites that are many hydro sites across the province that are more than 100 years old, and we continue to invest in them. It does really drive that collaboration and that partnership approach with Indigenous communities, and which we see as one of the ways we can advance reconciliation. In terms of economic benefits, I talked about the 75 and 90% aspects related to hydro, but really, it's also a price moderator. We all have to pay hydro for our residential homes, and we see hydro as one of the main price moderators in the province. It's one of the cheapest ways you can really generate hydro, and a lot of that has to do with once you actually build it, the cost of operating hydro is pretty low compared to other sources, and the fact that it can also operate for a very long life expectancy. It means that return on the investments is, happens it's stretched over a very long period. So, we see it as definitely one of the ways we can keep the prices of hydro more affordable to our citizens. We talked about the perpetual aspect of hydro. A lot of sites that they can run easily more than 100 years old if you're investing in them properly. And what we're seeing right now in our province, in the north as well in the south, we have about 5,000 megawatts of opportunities across the province. Out of that, we see about 3,000 to 4,000 of those opportunities in Northern Ontario, in the Northeast and the Northwest. We can probably go to the next slide. Thank you. So one of the great things about hydro is that the fuel is already there. Like those river systems are already there. So, when it comes to actually having access to that energy, and it's already there. We just need to be able to tap into it. You don't need to go and transport fuel from somewhere or rely on having any sort of supply chain issues or political issues. It provides that energy security. And we see our north basically, is an abundant source of water. We have few areas that we've looked at in the province, and these are in the map. You can see that they're all dotted there. One of our biggest concentration of generation, or opportunities, I should say, for more generation is in the Northeast, in the Moose River Basin. So we have a number of sites that we've identified there that have high potential, and those add up to more than 1,000 megawatts of generation. There will be many of these opportunities in the north, especially, will require either transmission reinforcements or new transmission to be built, which also will provide more opportunities for ownership and partnerships with the Indigenous communities. So on the Moose River Basin, I think that's an area probably that's close to many of the folks that are on the call here. The range right now, we've looked at it, and it's between 700 and 1,250. Realistically, we think it can be around 1,000 megawatts. OPG and its predecessor, Ontario Hydro, has done few assessment in the past over the last several decades. I would say like it's a topic that's been studied in length by Ontario Hydro, and I think it's an area that has a lot of potential as discussed. It's an area we've also we've been discussing with some of our communities and our Indigenous communities in particular. We have we have multiple sites, up to I believe 8 sites that we've identified in that area. We see that based on the demand that is being foreseen by the province and the length of the development of these projects. These projects are all projects that takes a long time to develop. I think that's the case for a lot of the reliable sources of supply, whether you're talking nuclear, hydro. A lot of these take a long time to develop. We see the time is now to actually start planning and engaging with the communities, with the Indigenous communities, and with the stakeholders to plan these projects. At this point, they're opportunities. They're not even projects. In order for them to go from an opportunity to a project, for Moose River Basin in particular, we have to commence the co-planning. And that co-planning discussion is a process led by the government and the Indigenous communities, right? So it's important in our, in OPG's opinion that this process to start and be led by those governments. And we also see the need for transition planning to start happening by the IESO and the different transmission operators in the province. So in the report that we talked about earlier, in the Northern Ontario Hydro report, we talked about really 4 main recommendations. Little Jackfish is one of our most advanced projects. It's in the northwest region near Lake Nipigon. We see as one of those projects that that is ready to move on to the next phase in recommencement of the EA. So that's one of the recommendations we have in the report. And that project will involve a number of Indigenous communities. I think we have about 6 Indigenous communities that are involved in that could be involved in that project. The next piece that we see as an opportunity for a province is to start co-planning for Moose River Basin, right? With the First Nations that are part of that process. We also have a number of existing assets across the province that have potential for optimization and getting more megawatts out of them, and they span across the province. So we are going to be pursuing opportunities in those, or if they're feasible. Obviously, we're going to be looking at the feasibility of these opportunities and pursuing those opportunities if they make sense. And the 4th item is really about the build out of our transmission system, our grid. In order for any new generation to come online, irrespective of who's building it, you do have to have a reliable and we have a reliable system, but you do have to have a transmission system that is built out so that can accommodate all that added generation. So that planning process will need to happen. It involves OPG and other really generators of power in the province. So, and I guess this is our last slide, and what we need from everybody here on this call is we need your help. Like we need, we see hydro as really as a viable option for addressing our energy shortfall in the province, and we need everybody's help. Whether you're talking, whether it's Indigenous communities, whether it's the industry partners. We need everybody to be a champion for Northern Ontario development. And one of the ways you can be part of this, the solution and advance more development in the North through hydro. If you're thinking about this as a purely electricity problem, we need more electricity. You can build more electricity in the South. Like if you're building gas, or if you're building nuclear, if you're building battery storage, there's a lot of options out there. And every one of them has different, challenges and opportunities that come with them. But really, when it comes to where it makes sense to build that new supply of power, if you're thinking about something outside of hydro, then the driver behind building building these energy sources in the north won't be as strong, right? So we definitely see a lot of opportunities for Northern Ontario to benefit from this development. And whether you're talking Northern Ontario communities, Indigenous communities, everybody who lives in the north, okay? We see our partners, Indigenous partners, industry partners, the communities, we see them as our strongest asset in actually driving this message. And we also see a role to play by everybody on this call in driving this message forward. So we're looking for your help, okay? And let us know if there's anything we can do to also help you in the messaging and in getting the information you need to actually advocate on behalf of Northern Ontario. And with that, I guess I'll turn it back to maybe Kate to close us off, or to actually manage any Q&A.
Sure. So really to I guess close off and bring this back to this group is we're at the beginning of the road when it comes to advocating for hydro for Northern Ontario communities, right? But I live in Northern Ontario. Ahmad pretty much kind of lives in Timmins at this point because he's here very, very often. But we want the North to be involved in the future of energy in the province and helping with this projected energy shortfall. And as Ahmad said, for Northern Ontario to be involved, it needs to be hydro, right? So we're looking to build advocacy at this point for hydro. And then, as Ahmad mentioned, we're looking for your help in doing this. So I'll go to the chat now. I think there's a couple of questions. So Candace says, how can Northern College help from a training and education perspective? So this is a big piece. I can turn over to Ahmad, but the training and education and the trades is a big piece to what we're talking about today. Absolutely. So.
Yeah, absolutely, Kate. And like we see definitely a big shortage of resources to actually do a lot of this work, especially in the trades. I would say maybe engaging more with the big industry partners in the north in terms of what their needs are, and setting up programs that help provide more training and more grads that can actually go into the trades and going, whether unionized or not, and actually being able to feed into the high demand that we see. We're also open to always, talking from an OPG perspective. OPG also hires trades for our own operations and our own projects, and we can definitely. We're also open to discussing our needs, and Kate does a lot of this, a lot of advocacy, as well as a lot of discussion with our stakeholders and our First Nation partners in terms of what their needs are and how we can help. So I think it's just a matter of maybe engaging with the industry partners, with the power producers, with the Indigenous communities, and as well. Indigenous communities are one of the fastest growing communities in population in Ontario. And, we definitely see a lot of, our goal is to maximize employment by our First Nations where we operate. So, what are the obstacles that First Nations have to have more of their members, study and graduate with degrees that they can actually use to find work? So these are the type of discussions that needs to happen.
And I'll just add too that this is something that OPG and every industry really is looking at right now in a big way. We're looking at how to encourage, starting at, even before students get to high school and encouraging them to go into the trades and just presenting this as an option for them, right? So we've been working a little bit more recently with Northern College up in Moosonee and talking about ways to sort of come together and do this. So if you, Candace, if you represent Northern College, then this is a good thing. We can work together and try and figure out, you know, how to get in the ear of students from an earlier age to sort of present that as an opportunity. Because I know growing up, there wasn't that sort of presented at trades as a career, so to a lot of us. So now we're sort of looking to sort of do that proactively, and we know it's definitely needed. There's another question here about where physically the Moose River Basin is.
Absolutely. So the Moose River Basin is really a collection of sites that are on few of the rivers that all form the Moose River Basin as a whole, right? So, you know, Matagami River, Abitibi River, for example. So when you look at, we're trying to sort of on a map plot these, you think of them as downstream of the existing OPG sites that are in that area. So those would be Long, Smoky, Harmon, and Kipling on the Matagami, and on the Abitibi, it would be Abitibi Canyon and Otter Rapids. So if I didn't get my geography wrong here, Kate, let me know if I got it right. But I would say the new sites will be downstream of those sites that I mentioned, okay, on either one of those two river systems.
There's another question about the highest priority projects, Ahmad, and if there's an estimated timeline for these projects. So
I guess it's the highest priority projects are in our recommendation. So, you know, Little Jackfish is one of our highest priority projects, and that's in the Northwest. And we see the Moose River Basin as one of our highest projects. Like we want to, OPG is interested in building it all. If we're asked by the government and if our First Nations are partners, if they want to partner with OPG, they want to bring them over as a partner with to actually build these projects. We're happy to do them all, and I'll be honest with you. That's really we have the capability to do that. We're happy to work with our First Nations and any to actually pursue those opportunities. But we do need the green light on these projects. We don't really. And that is the process that everybody has to follow especially if you're OPG. The direction for building these projects comes from the government. And these positive signals are needed before we can actually move forward. So you have to have. OPG recognizes that none of these projects will be built without First Nation partnership, and that's something we're very excited about, and we're looking forward for the opportunity to be part of that and to work with both our Indigenous partners that we're partners with today, as well as any prospective Indigenous partners, as well as the government to actually advance those two areas that I mentioned.
The next question is on building out roads in the north. So it says, in concert with the build out of transmission, is there any discussion on the build out of standard roads in the north?
So any transmission lines that are being built, and those are the majority, I would say, will be managed by someone else other than OPG. So in terms of what they're going to need to build those transmission lines, it could be an example would be Hydro One in partnership with a number of Indigenous communities, or it could be an Indigenous community that decides that gets the opportunity to build these transmission lines. But irrespective of that, OPG actually doesn't build those transmission lines. We build a portion of the transmission line to where the connection point happens, but really the bulk of the transmission line build out happens by others. So in terms of discussion on road, OPG hasn't been involved in any discussions related to building roads, for those projects on the transmission side. So unfortunately, I can't speak too much about that. And maybe unless someone else on, Kate has any further information, but it would have to be a question to Hydro One or someone else.
Dan asked a question, will there be any rerouting of waterways to create larger dams for the proposed net zero for 2050?
The final, I mean, it's a good question. At the end of the day, like, you know, these optimization aspects will decide how big the water, you know, the inundation or the flooding that's required for each one of these sites. So, and that's really a discussion that happens with the Indigenous communities that are affected by the project, and those Indigenous communities will be the ones partnering up, that OPG sees them as partners on these projects. So it's a conversation that happens depending on what the community. Every community has, you know, specific needs and challenges, and we, you know, OPG would typically, if they are developing a project, they would work with the community like we did with, for example, the TTN on the Peter Sutherland project. We would work with the community to land on the preferred concept that meets the community needs. And that, at the end of the day, and there's no real perfect size for that. So I would say every project is going to be different. There could be some impact on, you know, on water diversion or sizing, but it's a process that is done in collaboration with the Indigenous communities involved in the project.
Thank you. Wow, lots of questions coming in. That's great. It's Clem says, is load balancing more or less important with the forecasted production shortfall?
It depends on who you are. If you're ISO, for them, they're looking at it purely as you need more power, and it makes sense to build that power in the south because that's where you have all your load centers. So for them, they see it as a very sort of theoretical exercise. If you're talking about socioeconomics factors, I don't think load balancing becomes the only driver. I think it becomes one of the drivers. So I think it's what we're trying to do as OPG is to work with our industry partners, the OWA, for example, the Chambers of Commerce, as well as First Nations that we're partners with, you know, to actually change, maybe to influence some of that narrative. That it's not just about load balancing. It's really about all these socioeconomics benefits that these communities will get out of where these projects are going to be developed.
Yeah, and talking about socioeconomic benefits, and we talk about this a lot for Indigenous communities, but for non-Indigenous communities as well, I know a lot of our redevelopment work that's happened and continues to happen, and that's sort of part of this program that we're talking about as well, adding megawatts. And we've seen a lot of communities benefit from our projects around the province. So for example, here in the north, Kapuskasing and Smooth Rock Falls, when we had the Lower Matawamي River project happening, that created a lot of economic benefit for the communities in the area. We have redevelopment projects happening in the Sudbury area currently with Coniston and Stinson, coming up on the South River, on the Matabitchuan River. So we have these redevelopment projects that are going to be happening all over the province. So, you know, if your community that's not necessarily close to the Moose River Basin, where some of the greenfield development is looking at, you will still benefit from some of the other redevelopment work that we have going on across all of our fleet, right? So just wanted to mention that too. So there's one more question here in the chat. I think there's just one more. It says, you mentioned that you're looking to government to initiate the co-planning process and engaging with the impacted Indigenous communities. Have provincial and federal governments made any commitments in this regard? Do you have any early feedback from the Indigenous communities on these hydro project opportunities?
So I guess it's a two-part question. The first part, other than the only commitment that the government has made, the provincial government, was that they would do co-planning. That's really the only, and that commitment was made many years ago, back in '93. So I think what that co-planning process looks like and the mechanics of how it's going to be unfolded, I think that's going to be something that is still to be developed. So I think that both governments, I think, have interest in the Moose River Basin. They see the potential there. So I can say that for sure. But I think of how we're going to go from an opportunity to a project, or and through that working out all the aspects of the co-planning, and I think that's still to be developed. So we're hopeful that with the pathway to decarbonization report that was issued by the ISO and the consultation period that wrapped up about a month ago, that we're going to see some direction from the government in the next, hopefully this month or maybe in early next month. And we're hopeful that Moose River Basin and co-planning will be part of that. We can't guarantee that. We're not the government, but we're definitely have been in discussions with the government to encourage them to look into this opportunity and to initiate the co-planning discussion with the First Nations. The other part to that question, we have we're respecting sort of the co-planning expectations and what it should look like. We're very aware of our role at this point in that process. So we have discussed with the First Nations that are part of that co-planning and will be part of that co-planning. We've discussed these opportunities to the extent that Northern Ontario Hydro Report covers. We've shared with them the information that we have about these opportunities. And through that discussions, we've received feedback on some of that historical information, but in no shape or form, I would say this was a formal consultation or engagement related to co-planning, because that process is yet to be developed by the parties that are involved in that. And we're happy to support that process, whether you're talking about the First Nations or the government, the Ontario government. We're happy to support that process once those parties are ready with information and to facilitate to the extent we can.
I think that was it for the questions in the chat. I'm not sure if anyone else has any questions, but I just want to thank everyone. We really appreciate taking the time out to hear about OPG's sort of future and what we're looking at in Northern Ontario. I know this is going to affect us all in the future, right? And it's very positive in terms of Northern Ontario. So I also want to thank the Chamber for helping us to coordinate this presentation. Much appreciated. The Timmins Chamber specifically. So I don't know if you want to say a few closing words, Dan.
Yeah, sure. I'd like to thank Ahmad and yourself for joining us this morning and giving us this great talk on what's going on. And I'd also like to thank everybody in the group for being engaged and looking into this and being excited about what's going on in Northern Ontario in our future, never mind the next couple of years, but it's our future that's going through. So thanks everyone for being part of this, and the Chamber really will help advocating for all this, and hopefully we can help out at the same time, and everybody around here can help. So thanks guys for everything.
Do you want to answer one more question? I see there's one more.
Oh, sure. Oh, let me just open the chat, I guess.
Yeah, that's okay. I got it.
Oh,
here.
okay.
Yeah, so the question is about the Albany River, whether we're going to be looking at, so we are basically looking at all those opportunities in the Northeast and Northwest, but we definitely have to prioritize our time and resources. So I would say our priorities right now are the Little Jackfish and Moose River Basin, and we are in very early stages of exploring other opportunities outside of those two, including the Albany River. Thanks, Dan, for the closing remarks and for your team for setting this up, and for everybody else who joined us today and for their questions.
Perfect. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.